My name is Alex, and I've always been drawn to the fringes of the map, the places where the ink thins and gives way to blank spaces. Not because I was particularly brave or adventurous in the traditional sense, but because I found a certain solace in the unknown, a kind of quiet thrill in the possibility of something else. I worked as a freelance photojournalist, mostly focusing on wildlife and remote cultures. It wasn't a glamorous life, often involving long stretches of solitude and instant ramen, but it allowed me to indulge my curiosity and occasionally stumble upon stories that felt like whispers from a forgotten world. It was a particularly sweltering August day when the email arrived. My tiny apartment in Brooklyn was doing its best to imitate a sauna, the fan on my desk merely circulating the humid air. I was sifting through stock photos, trying to find a compelling image of a particularly uncooperative lemur for an article I was writing, when a new message popped up in my inbox. The sender was someone I vaguely knew, a man named Dr. Elias Thorne. Elias Thorne was an academic, a fringe scientist who'd made a name for himself in certain circles for his unorthodox theories on cryptozoology and undiscovered ecosystems. I'd met him a couple of times at obscure conferences, usually hunched over a table displaying grainy photographs of alleged mythical creatures or spouting theories about the survival of megafauna in remote pockets of the world. He was brilliant, undeniably, but also eccentric, with a wild glint in his eye that could be either captivating or unsettling, depending on the topic of conversation. The subject line of the email was simple: Expedition Opportunity, African Rainforest. My interest was immediately piqued. Thorne's previous ventures, as far as I knew, had been largely theoretical, fueled by grants and the unwavering belief of a small group of equally enthusiastic and perhaps equally eccentric colleagues. An actual expedition was a departure from his usual MO. I clicked the email open. It was surprisingly brief. Dear Alex, I hope this message finds you well. I am writing to you today with an invitation to an upcoming expedition into a remote region of the Congo rainforest. Recent data suggests the possibility of a unique biological phenomenon within the unexplored depths of this area. Something that I believe could be of significant scientific interest. The expedition will be privately funded and will consist of a small, carefully selected team. Your experience in documentation and navigating challenging environments would be invaluable. If you are interested in learning more, please reply to this email, and I will provide further details. Sincerely, Dr. Elias Thorne. My first instinct was skepticism. Thorne's unique biological phenomena had, in the past, ranged from plausibles, rediscovering a thought, to be extinct species of insect to wildly improbable, proving the existence of a freshwater plesiosaur in Lake Tella. Still, the mention of the Congo rainforest, a place that had always held a certain mystique for me, was undeniably alluring. And the phrase, privately funded, hinted at a level of seriousness that Thorne's previous endeavors had lacked. I spent the next hour debating with myself. Part of me, the pragmatic journalist in me, scoffed at the idea of chasing after another, one of Thorne's fantastical theories. But the other part, the one drawn to the blank spaces on the map, felt a familiar tug of excitement. What if, just this once, Thorne was onto something real? What if there was something extraordinary hidden within the dense foliage of the African rainforest? Against my better judgment, I replied to the email. Within a few hours, I received a response from Thorne, inviting me to a meeting at a rather unassuming office building in downtown Manhattan. The address was new to me, not the usual cluttered university office I associated with him. This further fueled my curiosity. The meeting took place 2 days later. The office was surprisingly modern and sterile, a stark contrast to Thorne's usual chaotic environment. He greeted me with an almost manic energy, his eyes gleaming with excitement. He was thinner than I remembered, his usually disheveled hair even more untamed. "Alex, thank you for coming," he exclaimed, shaking my hand vigorously. "I knew you'd be intrigued." He ushered me into a small conference room, where a large map of Central Africa was spread out on the table. He pointed to a region deep within the Congo, an area marked with sparse details and a lot of green. "This," he said, his voice hushed with reverence, "is where we are going." He proceeded to explain the recent data he'd mentioned in his email. It turned out to be a collection of anecdotal reports from remote villages near the area, whispers of strange occurrences, unusual animal behavior, and sightings of something unidentifiable. There were also some satellite images showing unusual thermal signatures and patterns within a specific, isolated part of the forest. Individually, these pieces of information might seem insignificant, but Thorne had woven them together into a compelling narrative, a suggestion that something truly unique, something perhaps entirely unknown to modern science, resided in this remote region. He spoke with an almost religious fervor, his enthusiasm infectious despite my inherent skepticism. He showed me thermal images with inexplicable heat anomalies, local testimonies translated from various dialects, describing strange sounds and shadowy figures, and even a few blurry photographs that purported to show unusual tracks and vegetation patterns. Of course, Thorne admitted, preempting my obvious questions, "This is all preliminary. But I have a strong feeling, Alex, a very strong feeling that we are on the verge of a significant discovery." He then introduced me to the other member of the expedition team who was present at the meeting, a young woman named Lena Hansen. Lena was a biologist specializing in tropical ecosystems. She had a quiet intensity about her, her gaze sharp and intelligent. Unlike Thorne's chaotic energy, Lena exuded a calm competence that I found reassuring. She explained that she had been following Thorne's research for years and was particularly interested in the potential impact of whatever they might find on the local environment. "Docker, Thorne's theories have always been ambitious," Lena said with a wry smile, "but the data he's compiled from this region is genuinely intriguing. There are several documented instances of unique flora and fauna in the surrounding areas, suggesting a high degree of endemism. What we might find deeper within could be truly extraordinary. As Thorne continued to elaborate on his theories, I found myself getting drawn in. The sheer remoteness of the area, the lack of reliable information, the whispers of the unknown, it all combined to create an irresistible pull. I knew the risks. I knew Thorne's track record, but the opportunity to venture into a truly unexplored part of the world, with the potential to witness something completely new, it was an offer I couldn't easily refuse. Over the next few weeks, the preparations for the expedition were intense. Thorne, despite his eccentricities, proved to be surprisingly organized when it came to logistics. Lena meticulously compiled lists of necessary equipment, vaccinations, and safety protocols. My role, as Thorne emphasized repeatedly, was to document everything. He wanted high-quality photographs, detailed video footage, and thorough written accounts of our findings. We met a few more times before our departure. Thorne introduced us to a local guide, a man named Kofi, who would be essential for navigating the rainforest and interacting with the local communities. Kofi was a quiet and experienced individual with a deep understanding of the region and its people. He spoke excellent English and had a calm demeanor that inspired confidence. As the departure date drew nearer, a sense of anticipation, mixed with a healthy dose of apprehension, began to build within me. I packed my camera gear, my satellite phone, and a first aid kit that Lena had insisted on reviewing. I reread Thorne's preliminary reports and the translated local accounts, trying to form a mental picture of what we might encounter. The stories were fragmented and often contradictory, ranging from sightings of unusually large animals to whispers of strange lights and unsettling sounds emanating from the deepest parts of the forest. Some spoke of a malevolent presence, a guardian spirit that protected the heart of the rainforest. Others hinted at something far more ancient, something that predated human understanding. I tried to remain objective, to approach these stories with a journalist's critical eye. But as I looked at the satellite images, the blurry photographs, and the thermal anomalies, a seed of doubt began to sprout in my mind. What if there was more to this than just Thorne's wild theories? What if something truly extraordinary, something that shouldn't exist, was waiting for us in the depths of the African rainforest? The journey to our starting point was long and arduous, involving multiple flights and a bumpy ride in a heavily modified four-wheel drive vehicle. As we traveled deeper into the heart of the Congo, the landscape transformed from bustling towns to scattered villages, and finally to an unbroken expanse of dense, green jungle. The air grew thick with humidity, and the sounds of the rainforest, the incessant chirping of insects, the calls of unseen birds, the rustling of leaves in the canopy above, became our constant companions. Kofi proved to be an invaluable guide. His knowledge of the terrain and his affinity with the local people, essential. He shared stories of the forest, tales passed down through generations, speaking of hidden trails, dangerous creatures, and places best left undisturbed. As we established our base camp on the edge of the unexplored region. A sense of isolation settled over us. We were hundreds of miles from the nearest town, surrounded by an impenetrable wall of vegetation. The only connection to the outside world was our satellite phone, a fragile lifeline in this vast wilderness. The first few days were spent setting up camp, organizing our supplies, and conducting preliminary surveys of the surrounding area. Lena was in her element, meticulously collecting samples of plants and insects, her enthusiasm for the biodiversity of the rainforest palpable. Thorn, fueled by an almost manic energy, constantly consulted his maps and satellite data, his excitement growing with each passing hour. I, meanwhile, focused on documenting our journey, taking photographs and videos of the landscape, the wildlife, and our daily activities. But as the days wore on, a subtle shift began to occur. The sounds of the rainforest seemed to change, the calls of the animals becoming less familiar, more alien. We started noticing unusual tracks, larger than any known creature in the area. And there were the smells, strange, musky odors that would drift through the air without any discernible source. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the trees, Kofi gathered us around a small fire. His usual calm demeanor seemed to have been replaced by a quiet unease. "There are old stories here," he said, his voice low. "Stories of the deep forest. Stories of things that walk that should not walk." He spoke of a creature, a legend whispered among the local tribes, a being said to inhabit the most remote parts of the rainforest. He called it Mokel, Mbembe, a name that sent a shiver down my spine even before I fully understood its meaning. He described it as a large, reptilian creature with a long neck and a powerful tail, a creature that some believed to be a living dinosaur. Thorn, of course, was ecstatic. This aligned perfectly with his theories. Lena, ever the scientist. However, we soon discovered why. Remained more skeptical, but there were unexplained accounts of such a creature in the region's folklore. I listened intently, my journalist's instincts kicking in. Was this just folklore, a product of fear and imagination? Or was there a kernel of truth in these ancient stories? As the days turned into nights, the atmosphere in our camp grew increasingly tense. We began to hear strange sounds in the darkness, sounds that defied explanation, guttural roars, high-pitched screams, and something that sounded like heavy footsteps moving through the undergrowth. We increased our vigilance, taking turns on watch throughout the night. Armed with our flashlights and a few basic defense tools, we tried to reassure ourselves that these were just the sounds of the jungle, the calls of nocturnal animals. But there was an undeniable sense of unease, a feeling that we were being watched, that something was out there, in the darkness beyond our campfire, observing us. Then, one morning, we found it. A footprint. It was massive, easily twice the size of any animal track I had ever seen. It was three-toed, with thick, clawed digits, and it was pressed deep into the muddy ground, near the edge of our camp. Lena examined it carefully, taking measurements and photographs. Her usual scientific detachment seemed to falter slightly as She looked up at us, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and something akin to fear. This isn't anything I recognize," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's wrong." Thorn, on the other hand, was practically jumping with excitement. "This is it," he exclaimed. "This is proof!"
The Mokul. Bamba!
I knew it!
Kofi remained silent, his face etched with a deep concern. He looked at the footprint, then at the dense forest surrounding us, a look of dread in his eyes. "This is not good," he murmured. "This is not good at all." That footprint marked a turning point in our expedition. The whispers of the unknown had suddenly become a tangible reality. The thrill of discovery was now overshadowed by a growing sense of apprehension. We had journeyed deep into the African rainforest, seeking something extraordinary. We were about to find it, and I had a terrible feeling that we were not going to like what we found. The discovery of the footprint hung heavy in the air, a tangible piece of the unsettling puzzle we had stumbled upon. Thorn was practically vibrating with excitement, his initial skepticism replaced by an almost childlike wonder. He wanted to follow the tracks immediately, convinced they would lead us to his elusive Mokul, Bambi. Lena, though clearly disturbed by the size and unfamiliar nature of the print, approached it with a scientist's methodical curiosity. She carefully documented every detail, taking multiple photographs from different angles and collecting soil samples from within the impression. Kofi, however, was a picture of quiet dread. He stared at the footprint for a long moment, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. "This track, it is old," he said finally, his voice low and gravelly. "But I have never seen anything like it. The legends, they say the Mokul, Mbembe, stays deep in the heart of the impassable forest. If this is its track, we are going into a place where no man is meant to go." Despite Kofi's ominous warning, Thorn was determined to proceed. The allure of the unknown, the potential for a groundbreaking discovery, had completely overshadowed any sense of caution. He argued that this was the very reason they had come: to explore the unexplored, to uncover the secrets hidden within this remote wilderness. Lena, while more hesitant, agreed that they couldn't ignore such compelling evidence. Her scientific curiosity ultimately outweighed her apprehension. Reluctantly, Kofi agreed to lead us, his unease evident in his every movement. He consulted the footprint, trying to discern the direction of travel. The tracks, though old, seemed to head deeper into the forest, towards a region marked on our maps as virtually impenetrable. We packed up our camp, a palpable tension in the air. The familiar sounds of the rainforest now seemed to carry a more sinister undertone. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, made us jump. I kept my camera close, my finger hovering over the shutter button, ready to document whatever we might encounter. The forest grew denser as we ventured further inland. The sunlight barely filtered through the thick canopy overhead, casting the undergrowth in a perpetual twilight. The air was heavy with humidity and the smell of decaying vegetation. Giant ferns and tangled vines created a natural barrier making our progress slow and arduous. Kofi moved with a practiced ease, his machete expertly clearing a path through the dense foliage. We followed closely behind, our senses on high alert. The ground was uneven and treacherous, riddled with hidden roots and slippery patches of mud. We crossed narrow streams and climbed over fallen logs, our boots sinking deep into the soft earth. The silence of the deep forest was broken only by our heavy breathing and the occasional call of an unseen bird. Even the usually ubiquitous insects seemed to have fallen silent, adding to the unnerving atmosphere. As we pressed on, we began to notice more unusual signs. We found patches of vegetation that had been inexplicably flattened, as if something large and heavy had passed through. We saw trees with deep gouges in their bark, too high to have been made by any known animal in the region. And the strange smells persisted, that musky, almost reptilian odor lingering in the air, growing stronger the further we went. One afternoon, as we were making our way through a particularly dense thicket, we heard a sound that stopped us all in our tracks. It was a deep, resonant roar, unlike anything I had ever heard before. It echoed through the trees, sending a shiver down my spine. Even Thorn, in his excitement, looked momentarily startled. "What was that?" Lena whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. Kofi's face was grim. "The forest speaks," he said softly. "It does not welcome us." We remained silent for a long moment, listening intently. The roar did not come again, but the oppressive silence that followed felt even more unsettling. We continued on, our pace quickening, a sense of urgency now driving us forward. Later that day, we stumbled upon something that made even Thorn's enthusiasm waver slightly. It was a clearing, a small open space in the dense forest. In the center of the clearing was a collection of bones. Not the scattered remains of a small animal, but large, bleached bones, some of them easily the size of a human femur. They were arranged in a strange, almost ritualistic pattern, forming a rough circle around a patch of bare earth. Lena approached the bones cautiously, examining them with her gloved hands. These are very old," she said, her voice subdued. "And they're not from any animal I recognize." Thorn, for once, was uncharacteristically quiet. He stared at the bones with a look of stunned disbelief. Kofi, meanwhile, refused to even enter the clearing. He stood at the edge of the tree line, his eyes darting nervously around. "This place is cursed," he muttered. "We should not be here." We took photographs of the bones, documenting their size and arrangement, but none of us could shake the feeling upon us that settled upon us in that clearing. It felt like we had stumbled upon something ancient and forbidden, a silent testament to a reality that lay far outside the realm of our understanding. As dusk began to fall, we decided to make camp for the night. Kofi insisted on building a large fire, much larger than we usually needed, claiming it would help to ward off any unwanted visitors. We ate our rations in silence, the crackling flames the only sound, breaking the oppressive stillness of the forest. The night was long and filled with unsettling noises. We heard strange rustling sounds. In the undergrowth, the distant hooting of owls that sounded strangely distorted. And once, a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the trees, abruptly cut short. Each sound sent a fresh wave of anxiety through our small group. I took the first watch, sitting by the fire with my flashlight, and a sense of growing dread. Every shadow seemed to take on a menacing form. Roverdo. Every rustle of leaves sounded like approaching footsteps. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone, that something was out there in the darkness, watching us. Around 3 in the morning, just as I was about to wake Lena for the next watch, I saw something. A flicker of movement in the periphery of my vision. I turned my head quickly, my heart pounding in my chest. At the edge of the firelight, standing between the trees, was a pair of eyes. They were large, luminous eyes, reflecting the firelight with an eerie intensity. They were unlike the eyes of any animal I knew, too big, too bright, and possessing a strange, almost intelligent quality. I stared at them, frozen, in fear, my hand instinctively reaching for the small knife I carried. The eyes remained there for a long moment, unblinking, as if studying me. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone, swallowed by the darkness of the forest. I scrambled to wake Thorn and Lena, my voice trembling. I saw something, I whispered urgently. Something watching us. They both sat up, their faces etched with concern. I described the eyes, the size and the strange luminescence. Kofi, who had also been awakened by my commotion, listened intently, his face pale in the firelight. The forest spirits, he murmured. They are showing themselves. They are warning us to leave. Thorn, predictably, was less inclined to believe in supernatural explanations. It was probably just an animal, he said, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. A large cat, maybe, or a primate. But I knew what I had seen. It wasn't the reflection of a cat or a primate. There was something else there, something that didn't belong. The following day, our progress was even slower. We were all on edge, constantly scanning our surroundings, listening for any unusual sounds. The oppressive atmosphere of the forest seemed to have intensified, as if the very air was thick with a sense of foreboding. Lena examined the droppings with a grim expression. This is definitely a large herbivore, she said. But I can't identify the bone fragments. They don't match anything in our database. Thorn's excitement was palpable. We're close, he kept repeating. I can feel it. Why? We're about to make history. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were venturing into something far more dangerous than Thorn could possibly imagine. The legends, the strange signs, the feeling of being watched, it all pointed towards something ancient and powerful, something that might not take kindly to being discovered. Towards late afternoon, we reached a small clearing dominated by a large, stagnant pool of water. The air here was thick and humid, buzzing with insects. The silence was almost absolute, broken only by the occasional croaking of a frog. As we approached the edge of the pool, Kofi suddenly stopped, holding up his hand. He pointed to the muddy bank. There, clearly visible in the soft earth, were the unmistakable tracks of the creature. And these were fresh, incredibly fresh. It had been here recently, perhaps just moments before. We cautiously approached the water's edge, our eyes scanning the murky depths. The surface of the pool was still and undisturbed. For a long moment, there was nothing. Just the oppressive silence and the feeling of anticipation hanging heavy in the air. Then, the water began to ripple. Slowly, deliberately, something began to rise from the depths of the pool. First, a long, serpentine neck, covered in rough, scaly skin. Then, a small, reptilian head, with large, intelligent eyes that seemed to fixate on us. It was the mokel, Mbemb. Or at least, something that fit the descriptions in the local legends. It was massive, far larger than I had imagined, its body mostly submerged beneath the murky water. It regarded us with a calm, almost curious gaze. For a moment, we were all frozen, speechless, staring in awe and disbelief at the creature before us. Thorn let out a gasp of pure elation. "It's real," he whispered. "It's actually real." Lena, her scientific mind immediately taking over, began to reach for her camera. I, too, fumbled for my equipment, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it, the discovery of a lifetime. But then something shifted in the creature's demeanor. Its eyes, which had been calm and curious, suddenly narrowed. A low growl rumbled from deep within its throat. The peaceful stillness of the clearing was shattered by a primal, terrifying sound. And then it moved. The long neck lashed out with incredible speed, striking towards us like a giant serpent. We scrambled back, startled by the sudden aggression. The creature pulled itself further out of the water, revealing a massive, barrel-shaped body and a long, powerful tail that thrashed through the vegetation. This was no gentle giant, no mythical creature content to remain hidden. This was something powerful, territorial, and very, very real. And it was clearly not happy to see us. Our moment of wonder had turned into a moment of terror. We had found something that shouldn't exist. And now it had found us. The speed of the mokel, Mbembe's attack, was terrifying. One moment it was a seemingly placid giant emerging from the water. The next it was a lightning, fast predator, its long neck snaked towards us, teeth bared in a silent snarl. We scattered, scrambling backwards away from the water's edge, adrenaline surging through our veins. Lena shrieked, stumbling over a root as she tried to retreat. Thorn, his initial awe replaced by sheer panic, tripped and fell, scrambling to his feet with a desperate yelp. Kofi, despite his fear, reacted instantly, grabbing my arm and pulling me behind a thick cluster of bamboo. The creature's head crashed into the spot where we had been standing moments before, its powerful jaws snapping shut with a sickening thud. The force of the impact shook the ground. We could smell its breath, a foul, musty odor that made my stomach churn. "Run," Kofi yelled, shoving me forward. "Get into the trees." We didn't need any further encouragement. We plunged into the dense undergrowth, pushing through tangled vines and thorny bushes, the sounds of the enraged creature crashing through the foliage behind us. Its massive body was surprisingly agile, tearing through the jungle with alarming speed. Glanced back and saw it lumbering after us, its powerful tail whipping back and forth, flattening everything in its path. Its reptilian head weaved from side to side, its intelligent, malevolent eyes searching for us. The image was seared into my mind, a living dinosaur, a relic of a forgotten age. Now, hunting us through the heart of the African rainforest. Lena and Thorn were struggling to keep up, their city shoes offering little grip on the uneven terrain. I could hear Lena's panicked gasps and Thorn's heavy breathing as we fled deeper into the green hell. "This way!" Kofi shouted, veering sharply to the right. He seemed to have a better sense of direction than the rest of us, his years of experience in the forest proving invaluable. We followed him blindly, our lungs burning, our bodies scratched and bruised by the unforgiving undergrowth. The roars of the creature echoed through the trees, growing closer, then fading slightly, only to return with renewed ferocity. It was hunting us, and it was relentless. After what felt like an eternity, Kofi suddenly stopped, pointing towards a narrow ravine, partially hidden by thick vegetation. "Down there," he gasped. "Maybe it cannot follow." Without hesitation, we slid down the steep embankment, the loose soil and rocks giving way beneath our feet. We landed in the ravine with a series of thuds and gasps, our bodies aching from the impact. The ravine was narrow and overgrown, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. It offered some cover, but I knew it wouldn't stop the creature for long. We huddled together, catching our breath, listening for any sign of our pursuer. For a moment, there was only the sound of our ragged breathing and the distant chirping of birds. Then, we heard it, the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps crashing through the undergrowth above us. The Mokal, Mbembe, had tracked us. "One need to keep moving," Lena whispered, her face pale and streaked with dirt. Her arm was bleeding from a long scratch, probably from a thorny vine. Thorn, his face ashen, nodded in agreement. He seemed to have lost his initial excitement, replaced by a stark realization of the danger we were in. We continued down the ravine, the dense vegetation providing some concealment. But the terrain was difficult, and our pace was slow. We knew it was only a matter of time before the creature caught up to us. Suddenly, Kofi stopped again, his eyes wide with fear. He pointed to the ground. There, in the soft mud, were fresh tracks. Not just one set, but multiple sets, all heading in the same direction as the ravine. And they weren't the three toed prints of the Mokal, Mbembe. These were smaller but still disturbingly large, with 4 distinct claw marks. "Something else is here," Kofi whispered, his voice trembling. "Something. I don't know." The realization sent a fresh wave of terror through me. We weren't just being hunted by one prehistoric monster. There might be others. The rainforest, which had seemed so vibrant and full of life, now felt like a terrifying, primeval world filled with unknown dangers. As we continued along the ravine, the vegetation began to thin out. We emerged into a more open area, a small clearing with a rocky outcrop in the center. It offered a clear view of our surroundings, but also left us exposed. "We need to find somewhere to hide," Lena said urgently, scanning the clearing. The rocky outcrop seemed like our best option. It was steep and jagged, but it might provide a temporary refuge. We scrambled towards it, hoping to reach the higher ground before the creature found us again. Just as we reached the base of the outcrop, we heard a deafening roar that shook the very ground beneath our feet. The Mokal then burst into the clearing, its massive form filling our vision. It had found us. We scrambled up the rocky slope, our hands and feet scraping against the rough stone. The creature roared again, its eyes fixed on us, with predatory intent. It tried to follow, but the steep incline and the jagged rocks seemed to impede its progress. We reached a small ledge near the top of the outcrop. Just as the Mokal slammed its massive head against the rocks below, sending a shower of debris raining down on us. We huddled together, terrified, watching as the creature paced back and forth at the base of the outcrop, its frustrated roars echoing through the forest. We were trapped. The sun began to set, casting long, ominous shadows across the clearing. The temperature dropped, and a chill permeated the air. We were exhausted, injured, and terrified. Our water supplies were dwindling, and we had no idea how long we could remain on this exposed ledge. As darkness enveloped the rainforest, the sounds of the jungle intensified. We heard the familiar chirping of insects and the calls of nocturnal animals. But there were other sounds too, strange rustlings in the undergrowth, distant howls, and the unsettling sound of something large moving stealthily through the trees. The Mokal remained at the base of the outcrop, its massive silhouette barely visible in the darkness. We could hear its heavy breathing and the occasional snap of branches as it moved around. We knew it was still there, waiting for us. Suddenly, Kofi gasped, pointing into the darkness beyond the clearing. "Look," he whispered, his voice filled with a renewed sense of terror. Emerging from the trees were several pairs of glowing eyes, similar to the ones I had seen near our campfire. But these were closer, and there were more of them. They moved with a fluid, silent grace, circling the rocky outcrop, their luminous eyes fixed on us. They were smaller than the Mokal, but there were at least 4 or 5 of them. Their forms were indistinct in the darkness, but I could make out long, slender bodies and sharp, pointed snouts. They looked like some kind of predatory reptile, but unlike anything I had ever seen. The Mokal seemed to notice them too. It let out a series of low growls, a clear warning to these new arrivals. The glowing eyes flickered in response, but the creatures did not retreat. Instead, they seemed to be waiting, watching. We were caught between 2 dangers: the massive Mokal, below, and these smaller, equally menacing creatures surrounding us in the darkness. Our situation had gone from bad to unimaginably worse. Sleep was impossible. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent our hearts racing. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. We were trapped on this small ledge, exposed and vulnerable, surrounded by unknown predators in the heart of a primeval forest. As the night wore on, the sounds of the rainforest became increasingly bizarre and unsettling. We heard high, pitched shrieks that sounded almost human, guttural croaks that resonated deep within the earth, and a strange, rhythmic drumming that seemed to come from the depths of the forest. Just before dawn, the Mokul, Mbembe, let out a series of deafening roars that echoed through the trees, seemingly in response to something we couldn't see. The creatures with the glowing eyes also became more agitated, their hissing and snapping sounds growing louder. Then, as the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the canopy, we saw it. A large shape moving through the trees towards the clearing. It was big, even bigger than the Mokul, Mbembe, with a dark, hulking form that seemed to absorb the light. The Mokul, Mbembe, which had been so menacing just hours before, now seemed agitated, even frightened. It turned towards the approaching shape, letting out a series of frantic roars that sounded more like cries of distress. The new creature emerged from the trees, and I gasped in horror at the sight of it. It was vaguely reptilian in form, but its features were grotesque and distorted. Its skin was a patchwork of different textures, like had been pieced together from various animals. It had multiple limbs, some ending in sharp claws, others in fleshy, tentacle-like appendages. Its head was a nightmarish amalgamation of different creatures, with too many eyes and a gaping maw filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. It was an abomination, something truly unnatural, something that should not exist, and it was heading straight for the clearing. The Mokul, Mbembe, sensing the new threat, turned to face it, its initial aggression forgotten. The two monstrous creatures met in the center of the clearing, and a battle of titans ensued. The ground shook with their roars and the force of their blows as they clashed, tearing at each other with savage fury. We watched in horrified fascination from our precarious perch, completely forgotten in the face of this even greater terror. What we had found in the African rainforest was far more terrifying than any cryptozoological mystery. We had stumbled upon something truly ancient, something truly monstrous, something that defied all understanding. And our nightmare had just begun. The battle between the two monstrous creatures was a scene of unimaginable horror. The Mokul, Mbembe, despite its size and power, seemed outmatched by the sheer alien nature of its opponent. The grotesque creature moved with an unnatural fluidity, its multiple limbs flailing, tearing at the Mokul, Mbembe's thick hide. The air was filled with their deafening roars, the snapping of jaws, and the sickening sound of tearing flesh. We huddled on the ledge, paralyzed by fear, watching the brutal spectacle unfold below. The creatures with the glowing eyes scattered, seemingly unwilling to get caught in the crossfire of this titanic clash. "We have to get out of here," Lena whispered, her voice trembling. "While they're distracted." It was a risky proposition. Descending the rocky outcrop would leave us exposed, but staying there meant risking being caught in the middle of the fight or facing whichever monster emerged victorious. Kofi nodded grimly. "Lena is right," Now is our chance. Carefully, we began to climb down the backside of the outcrop, away from the raging battle. The descent was treacherous, the rocks loose and jagged. We moved slowly and cautiously, trying to make as little noise as possible. Just as we reached the bottom, we heard a final, agonizing roar from the mokel. Bem, followed by a sickening crunch. We didn't dare to look back, but the sounds told a grim story. The abomination had won. We turned and fled into the dense forest, moving as quickly and quietly as we could. The sounds of the victorious creature tearing into its fallen foe echoed behind us, a chilling reminder of the danger we had escaped. We stumbled through the undergrowth, our bodies aching, our minds reeling from the horrors we had witnessed. The forest, once a place of mystery and wonder, now felt like a terrifying labyrinth, filled with unimaginable threats. We traveled for what felt like hours, pushing ourselves to our physical and mental limits. We dared not stop for long, knowing that the creature that had defeated the mokel, Bem, could be anywhere. The glowing-eyed predators also remained a lurking threat in the darkness. As we moved, we began to notice more signs of the grotesque creature. We found patches of strangely melted vegetation, as if touched by some corrosive substance. We saw trees twisted into unnatural shapes, their bark scarred with deep, irregular gouges. And the musky, reptilian smell was now accompanied by a new odor, a sickly sweet, almost chemical scent that made our stomachs churn. The psychological toll of our experience was immense. Every shadow seemed to hide a monster. Every rustle of leaves sounded like approaching footsteps. We were constantly on edge, our nerves struggling to process the reality of what we had seen. After what seemed like an eternity, we finally stumbled upon a familiar trail, one that Kofi had marked on our way in. It was a small beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness. Following the trail, we eventually reached our abandoned base camp. It was deserted, our tents ripped and torn, our supplies scattered. The mokel, Mbembe, hadn't reached it, but something else had. We could see the sanged tracks with 4 claws that we had found earlier. We salvaged what little supplies we could find, some water, a few remaining rations, and my satellite phone. Thankfully, it still had power. We knew we had to get out of the rainforest as quickly as possible. The journey back was a blur of exhaustion and fear. We moved constantly, only stopping to rest when we were physically unable to continue. We encountered other strange creatures, insects with glowing carapaces, primates with unnaturally elongated limbs, but thankfully nothing as large or as terrifying as the mokel, Bem, or the abomination we had seen. Finally, after days of relentless travel, we reached the edge of the rainforest and stumbled into a small, remote village. The villagers were initially wary of our disheveled appearance, but Kofi, using his local connections, managed to explain our situation, omitting the more unbelievable details. We were flown out of the region a few days later, leaving behind the horrors we had witnessed. Back in civilization, the world felt strangely normal, almost surreal, in stark contrast to the primeval nightmare we had just escaped. Lena, ever the scientist, tried to rationalize what we had seen, focusing on the unique biodiversity of the region and the possibility of undiscovered species. But even she couldn't fully explain the grotesque creature, the thing that seemed to defy all biological laws. Thorne, on the other hand, became even more obsessed with his theories, convinced that we had glimpsed a hidden ecosystem, a forgotten corner of the world, teeming with unimaginable life. He tried to organize another expedition, but no one, including Lena and myself, would agree to go back. As for me, I returned to my quiet life in Brooklyn. But the memory of the African rainforest, the roar of the Mokel, Mumbem, the sight of the abomination, the terror in Kofi's eyes, it all stayed with me. I tried to write about it, to make sense of what we had experienced, but the words always seemed inadequate, failing to capture the true horror of what we had encountered. I showed my photographs and videos to experts, but the blurry images only raised more questions than answers. Some dismissed them as elaborate hoaxes, others suggested they were misidentified known species. No one could explain the creature we had seen in the clearing. Sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet. However, we soon discovered why. I find myself looking at the blank spaces on the map, wondering what else might be lurking in the unexplored corners of our world. We journeyed deep into the African rainforest, searching for the unknown. We found it. And I pray that nothing like it is ever found again. Some things are better left undiscovered, lurking in the shadows, existing only in nightmares. Because sometimes, true scary stories are the ones that defy explanation. The ones that leave you with a chilling certainty that there are things in this world that should simply not exist. My name is Alex, and I've always been drawn to the forgotten corners of the world. Not in a historical society kind of way, though I appreciate a good artifact as much as the next person. My fascination lies more in the raw, untamed places. The spots where nature has begun to reclaim what was once built or used by human hands. It's in these spaces, I believe, that the echoes of the past are loudest. And sometimes, if you listen closely enough, you can hear whispers of things long gone. This particular obsession of mine often leads me and my two closest friends, Chris and Sarah, on what we jokingly call urban exploration. Trips, it's not always urban, mind you. Sometimes it's deep in the woods. Other times it's in abandoned industrial complexes miles outside the city. The thrill isn't just in the exploration itself, but in the unexpected discoveries we sometimes make. We found old journals, forgotten photographs, even once stumbled upon a perfectly preserved vintage car hidden away in a dilapidated barn. Each find tells a story, a silent testament to a life lived or a moment in time that has faded from collective memory. Chris is the pragmatic one of our trio. He's an engineer by trade, with a sharp mind for logic and a healthy dose of skepticism. He often acts as our voice of reason, grounding my more impulsive ideas and Sarah's sometimes overly enthusiastic leaps of faith. But beneath his practical exterior lies a genuine sense of adventure, a curiosity that matches our own, even if he expresses it with a bit more caution. He's the one who meticulously researches locations beforehand, looking for historical records or local legends that might hint at interesting places to explore. Sarah, on the other hand, is the artist. She sees the world through a different lens, finding beauty and intrigue in the decay and the overlooked. She's a photographer, and her camera is her constant companion, capturing the textures, the light, and the shadows of the places we visit. She has an uncanny ability to find the perfect angle, the shot that tells a story without words. Sarah is also the most open to the possibility of the unknown, the unexplained. While Chris might scoff at ghost stories, Sarah is the one who leans in, apparently, her eyes wide with a mixture of fascination and a healthy dose of apprehension. Our latest adventure began with a rumor, a hushed whisper I'd overheard at a local antique shop. An old-timer, a man with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of stories, had mentioned an unusual anomaly found years ago in the sprawling, mostly undeveloped land just outside our town. He spoke of a stone door, buried deep beneath the earth, discovered by a group of teenagers exploring a network of old, forgotten drainage tunnels. He claimed the teenagers, spooked by what they found, had quickly covered it back up and never spoken of again. Now, usually, I'd take such a story with a grain of salt. Local folklore is often more fiction than fact. But something about the way the old man spoke, the genuine unease in his voice, sparked my interest. I did some digging, cross-referencing old local news articles and historical society records. There was no mention of any such discovery, which only made the story more intriguing. It felt like a secret, something deliberately buried and forgotten. I pitched the idea to Chris and Sarah over our usual Saturday morning breakfast at the local diner. Chris, as expected, was skeptical. A buried door. Sounds like an urban legend to me, Alex. Teenagers probably saw a rock formation and their imaginations ran wild. Sarah, however, was immediately hooked. A secret door underground. That sounds incredible. What do you think was behind it? Her eyes were already shining with excitement. That's the million-dollar question, I replied, taking a sip of my coffee. The old guy said it was deep, and it looked ancient. He didn't know what was behind it, only that the kids who found it were freaked out. Chris sighed. And of course you want us to go digging for it. Well, not literally digging, I clarified. The old man gave me a general area of where the tunnels were supposed to be. They were part of an old, failed development project from decades ago, supposedly abandoned and mostly sealed off. But he mentioned a few access points that might still be open. After a bit more persuasion, and perhaps swayed by Sarah's infectious enthusiasm, Chris reluctantly agreed. His engineering background, he admitted, made him curious about the structural integrity of such an old tunnel system. So, armed with the old man's vague directions, some topographical maps I'd managed to find online, and our usual assortment of flashlights, ropes, and basic safety gear, we set off the following weekend. The area was a mix of overground fields and patches of dense woodland, the remnants of the failed development slowly being swallowed by nature. Victims were apparently eaten. It took us the better part of the morning to locate what we believed to be the entrance to the old drainage system. It was hidden beneath a thick tangle of vines and overgrown bushes, a crumbling concrete opening barely visible. The air inside the tunnel was immediately cooler, carrying the damp, earthy smell of old concrete and stagnant water. It was dark, the only light coming from our flashlights cutting through the gloom. The tunnel was surprisingly spacious at first, tall enough for us to walk upright, though the floor was uneven and littered with debris. As we ventured deeper, were apparently eaten, the tunnel narrowed and the ceiling lowered, forcing us to hunch over in places. The silence was heavy, broken only by the echo of our footsteps and the occasional drip of water. We explored for what felt like hours, following the winding path of the tunnel system. There were several offshoots and smaller passages, most of which seemed to lead to dead ends, or were too narrow to navigate. Just as we were starting to feel like the old man's story was indeed just a legend, we reached a section of the tunnel that felt different. The air grew noticeably colder, and there was a faint, almost metallic scent in the air. The walls here were smoother, the concrete replaced by large, crudely hewn stones that seemed much older than the rest of the tunnel. The tunnel opened into a small, circular chamber. In the center of the chamber, illuminated by the beams of our flashlights, was exactly what the old man had described as a stone door. It was set flush into the floor, a large, circular slab of dark, gray stone with no visible hinges or handles. It looked ancient, the surface worn smooth by time and the elements. There were strange, intricate carvings etched into the stone, symbols that none of us recognized. They seemed alien, out of place in this forgotten corner of the earth. A wave of awe, mixed with a growing sense of unease, washed over me. It was real. The buried door was real. Chris, ever the pragmatist, knelt down and examined the stone. "This is incredible," he muttered, running his hand over the smooth surface. "The stonework looks incredibly old. Older than anything else we've seen in these tunnels." Sarah was circling the door slowly, her camera clicking softly as she documented every detail. "What do you think is underneath?" she whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. That was the question that hung heavy in the air. What was the purpose of this door, buried so deep underground? And why had the teenagers who found it been so frightened? We tried to find a way to open it, pushing and pulling at the edges, but the door remained stubbornly sealed. There were no visible mechanisms, no obvious way to lift or slide it open. It was as if it was meant to remain closed, a secret locked away beneath the earth. As the initial excitement began to wear off, a sense of unease settled upon us. The air in the chamber felt heavy, almost oppressive. The silence seemed to press in on us, amplifying the sound of our own breathing. There was something about this place, something ancient and unknown, that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. "Maybe we should just leave it," Chris said finally, his voice hesitant. "Maybe it's better not to know what's down there." For a moment, I considered it. Chris was right. There was a palpable sense of wrongness about this place, a feeling that we had stumbled upon something that was not meant to be found. But the curiosity, the burning desire to know what lay behind that stone door, was too strong to ignore. "We've come this far," I said, my voice firm despite the knot of apprehension in my stomach. "We have to try and open it." Sarah nodded in agreement, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of excitement and something else, something I couldn't quite place. Chris sighed again, but I could see the curiosity in his eyes as well. "All right," he said, "but let's be careful. We have no idea what we're dealing with here." We spent the next hour trying different methods to open the door. We used our tools to try and pry at the edges, but the stone was immovably set. We examined the carvings, looking for any kind of clue, any hint of a mechanism. But the symbols remained enigmatic, offering no answers. Just as we were starting to feel defeated, Sarah noticed something we had overlooked. Along the edge of the door, almost hidden beneath a layer of grime, was a series of small indentations arranged in a circular pattern. "Look," she exclaimed, pointing her flashlight at the indentations. "They look like slots." We examined them closely. There were 5 of them, evenly spaced around the circumference of the door. They were just large enough to fit a small, cylindrical object. Keys. Sarah wondered aloud. Could it be some kind of lock? It seemed plausible. An ancient locking mechanism hidden in plain sight. The question now was, what kind of key would fit these slots? And where would we find them? The realization that we were potentially dealing with something incredibly old, something that might have been deliberately sealed away for a reason, sent a fresh wave of unease through me. But the allure of the unknown, the possibility of uncovering a secret lost to time, was too powerful to resist. We had found the door. Now, we had to know what lay behind it. Victims apparently eaten. And I had a sinking feeling that whatever it was something that truly shouldn't exist. The discovery of the indentations along the edge of the stone door sparked a renewed sense of purpose. A tangible puzzle to solve in the face of the overwhelming mystery. We immediately began rummaging through our backpacks, pulling out anything that might remotely fit the small circular slots. We tried our pens, the tips of our multi-tools, even the small LED flashlights we carried. None of them were the right size or shape. Some were too thick, others too thin. And none seemed to fit the depth of the indentations. Maybe they're not meant for keys in the traditional sense, Sarah mused, running her finger along the edge of one of the slots. Maybe they're more like pressure points. Or maybe something needs to be inserted in a specific order. Chris, ever the engineer, was examining the indentations with his flashlight, his brow furrowed in concentration. They seemed too uniform for pressure points. And there's definitely a depth to them, like something is meant to be inserted and held in place. He tapped one of the slots thoughtfully. The spacing is also interesting. 5 of them, evenly distributed. It feels deliberate. We spent a good half-hour experimenting. Victims were apparently eaten, trying different combinations of pressure and attempting to insert various small objects we found on the floor of the chamber, loose pebbles. Small shards of rock, but nothing seemed to trigger any kind of response from the stone door. It remained as inert and unyielding as ever. Frustration began to creep in. We had come so far, faced our initial skepticism, and the unsettling atmosphere of the tunnels, only to be met with a locked door and no apparent way to open it. The silence of the chamber, once just heavy, now felt almost mocking, as if the ancient guardians of this place were amused by our futile attempts. Okay, let's think about this logically, Chris said, finally standing up and dusting off his knees. We know this door is old, possibly very old. Whatever locking mechanism it has is likely to be equally archaic. Think about ancient locks. What did they typically involve? Tumblers, I suggested. Or maybe some kind of sliding bolt. Possibly, Chris replied. But these indentations don't really suggest either of those. They're too small and too numerous for simple tumblers, and there's no visible slot for a bolt to slide into. Sarah walked slowly around the chamber, her flashlight beam dancing across the stone walls. Maybe the keys aren't on the door itself, she said, her voice thoughtful, apparently eaten. Maybe they're somewhere else in this chamber. The thought hadn't occurred to me. We had been so focused on the door itself that we hadn't really paid much attention to the rest of the small, circular room. It was relatively bare, the walls made of the same rough, hewn stone as the tunnel leading in. There was a thin layer of dust and grime covering everything, and a few scattered rocks lay on the floor. We began a more thorough search of the chamber, our flashlights illuminating every nook and cranny. We ran our hands along the cold, damp stone walls, feeling for any hidden levers or mechanisms. We carefully examined the floor, were apparently eaten, hoping to find some kind of object that might fit the indentations on the door. The search yielded nothing. The chamber seemed deliberately devoid of any other features besides the door itself. The silence remained unbroken, save for our own movements and hushed whispers. The air felt colder than before, a subtle shift that sent a shiver down my spine. "This is getting us nowhere," I said, a hint of discouragement in my voice. Maybe the old man was wrong. Maybe the teenagers just imagined the whole thing. Sarah shook her head firmly. "No, Alex. We saw the door. It's real. And those indentations have to mean something." She knelt back down in front of the door, her gaze fixed on the strange carvings etched into the stone. Maybe the symbols have a clue. We all gathered around the door again, carefully examining the intricate patterns. They were a mix of geometric shapes and stylized figures, unlike anything I had ever seen. Some resembled celestial bodies, stars, moons, perhaps even constellations. Others were more abstract, swirling lines and interconnected circles. And then there were the figures, vaguely humanoid, but with elongated limbs and strangely shaped heads. They seemed to be depicted in various poses, some reaching towards the sky, others huddled together as if in fear. "Do you recognize any of these?" I asked Chris, who had a passing interest in ancient history and mythology. He shook his head. "No, they're not familiar. It's not any language or iconography I've ever seen. It looks older. Much older." Sarah took several photographs of the carvings, zooming in on the details. "Maybe I can try to find something online later," she said. "See if any of these symbols match anything in ancient texts or archaeological findings," while Sarah continued to photograph the door. I ran my hand over one of the carvings, a depiction of a figure with multiple arms reaching towards a central, star-like symbol. As my fingers traced the lines of the carving, I felt a faint vibration beneath my fingertips, a subtle hum that seemed to resonate through the stone. I pulled my hand back quickly, startled. "Did you guys feel that?" I asked, looking at Chris and Sarah. They both looked at me, their expressions questioning. "Feel what?" Chris asked. "A vibration, like a faint humming in the stone." They both placed their hands on the door where I had touched it, but neither of them felt anything. "I don't feel anything, Alex," Chris said after a moment. "Me neither," Sarah echoed. "Maybe it was just your imagination." I wasn't so sure. The feeling had been distinct, a subtle but undeniable vibration. Was it possible that touching the carvings in a certain way could trigger something? I tried again, placing my hand on the same carving. This time, the vibration was stronger, accompanied by a faint clicking sound from somewhere within the stone. "There!" I exclaimed. "Did you hear that?" Chris and Sarah both nodded. "Yeah, I heard it that time," Chris said, his eyes widening slightly. "What do you think it means?" We began systematically touching each of the carvings, trying to see if any of them produced a similar reaction. Most of them remained inert, but when Sarah touched a carving of a crescent moon, we heard another faint click, and when Chris touched a carving of a swirling spiral, a third click followed. A pattern was emerging. It seemed that certain carvings, when touched, were triggering some kind of internal mechanism within the door. Could these carvings be the keys we were looking for? "There are 5 indentations," Sarah said, her voice filled with excitement. "And we found 3 carvings that react. Maybe we need to find 2 more." We continued our exploration of the carvings, carefully touching each one. It took us another 10 minutes, but eventually, we found the remaining 2. Touching a carving of a stylized eye produced the 4th click, and touching a carving of a figure with its hands clasped together resulted in the 5th and final click. As the last click echoed through the silent chamber, a low grinding sound emanated from the stone door. We all held our breath, our hearts pounding in our chests. The circular slab of stone began to rotate slowly, a thin line of darkness appearing where it had once been seamlessly joined to the floor. Dust and a musty, ancient smell wafted up from the opening as the door continued to turn, revealing a dark, gaping hole leading down into the unknown. The grinding sound stopped, and the stone door came to rest, revealing a circular staircase spiraling down into the darkness. A wave of triumph washed over us, quickly followed by a surge of apprehension. We had done it. We had opened the door. But now, staring into the black abyss below, the question that had been lingering in the back of our minds came rushing to the forefront. What awaited us in the darkness? The air coming from the opening felt different, colder and heavier, carrying a faint, metallic tang that made my nostrils tingle. There was also a subtle undercurrent of something else, something indescribable, something that felt wrong. It was a primal feeling, a sense of danger that whispered in the back of my mind, urging me to turn back. Chris shone his flashlight down into the opening, the beam disappearing into the inky blackness. "It looks like a long way down," he said, his voice a little shaky. Sarah leaned closer, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. "What do you think is down there?" she whispered. I didn't know. My mind raced, trying to come up with a logical explanation. An ancient tomb, a forgotten storage chamber, but the unsettling feeling in the air, the strange carvings on the door, the very fact that this place had been deliberately buried and hitting it all pointed to something far more mysterious and potentially far more sinister. Despite the growing sense of unease, the lure of the unknown was too strong to resist. We had come too far to turn back now. We had to know what lay at the bottom of that staircase. "We go down," I said, my voice sounding more confident than I felt. "But we stick together, and we're ready for anything." Chris and Sarah exchanged nervous glances, but they both nodded in agreement. Sarah grabbed her camera, making sure the flash was working. Chris double-checked his flashlight and the small first aid kit he always carried. I took a deep breath, trying to quell the growing sense of dread in my stomach. One by one, we stepped onto the first step of the ancient staircase, the stone cold and rough beneath our feet. As we began our descent into the darkness, the stone door above us silently began to rotate back into place, sealing us in the darkness below. The faint light from the chamber above disappeared, and we were plunged into absolute blackness, apparently eaten. The beams of our flashlights the only thing separating us from the unknown horrors that might lie ahead. The air grew colder, the metallic scent stronger. We're apparently eaten, and the feeling of wrongness intensified, a silent warning that echoed in the darkness. What lies below should not exist. The darkness that enveloped us as the stone door sealed shut above was absolute, a thick, suffocating void that swallowed the light from our flashlights. The only sounds were the echoes of our footsteps on the stone stairs and the sound of our own breathing, amplified in the oppressive silence. The air was heavy, the metallic scent now almost overpowering, mixed with a damp, earthy odor that spoke of centuries of undisturbed stillness. The staircase spiraled downwards relentlessly, each step worn smooth by time and unseen feet. The stone was cold and damp beneath our boots, and the walls of the stairwell were rough and uneven, occasionally brushing against our shoulders as we descended. There was no railing, and the spiral was tight enough that we had to watch our footing carefully to avoid tripping and falling into the darkness. As we went deeper, The temperature continued to drop, a bone-chilling cold that seeped into our clothes and made our teeth chatter. The silence seemed to press in on us, apparently eaten, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that unseen eyes were observing our every move from the surrounding darkness. "How far down do you think this goes?" Sarah whispered, her voice echoing slightly in the stairwell. "I have no idea," Chris replied, his voice strained. "Feels like we've been walking for ages." It did feel like an eternity. Each step we took seemed to lead us further away from the world we knew, deeper into the heart of the earth and whatever secrets it held. The beam of my flashlight danced nervously on the stone steps ahead, revealing nothing but more of the same endless descent. Just as I was starting to wonder if the staircase would ever end, I saw a faint glimmer of light in the distance below. It was a weak, flickering light, but after the absolute darkness of the stairwell, it looked like a beacon. "I see something!" I exclaimed, pointing my flashlight towards the light. Chris and Sarah followed my gaze, their faces lighting up with a mixture of relief and anticipation. We quickened our pace, the steps becoming less steep as the staircase finally began to level out. The staircase opened into another chamber, much larger than the one above. The flickering light came from several strange, glowing crystals embedded in the walls and ceiling of the chamber. They emitted a soft, ethereal light, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on our eyes. The chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in the gloom above. The walls were made of the same rough, hewn stone as the stairwell, but here they were covered in more of the strange, intricate carvings we had seen on the door above. These carvings, however, were much more extensive and detailed, depicting scenes that were both fascinating and deeply disturbing. Many of the carvings showed the same elongated figures we had seen before, but here they were engaged in various activities. Some appeared to be performing strange rituals, their arms raised towards the glowing crystals above. Others were interacting with bizarre, unidentifiable creatures, some of which seemed to be part animal, part plant, and part something else entirely. There were also depictions of what looked like advanced technology, intricate machines and devices that seemed far beyond anything that should have existed in ancient times. It was a bewildering and unsettling sight, a glimpse into a history that defied explanation. In the center of the chamber was a large, circular platform made of the same dark gray stone as the door above. On the platform lay several objects as strange, geometric devices made of an unknown metal, were apparently eaten, intricately carved boxes, and what appeared to be some kind of skeletal remains, though the bones were unlike anything human. The air in this chamber was different from the stairwell. It was still cold, but the metallic scent was less overpowering, replaced by a faint, sweet odor that was almost sickeningly cloying. There was also a low, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the glowing crystals, a subtle vibration that we could feel in our bones. We moved cautiously into the chamber, our flashlights cutting through the gloom, illuminating the bizarre surroundings. The silence here was broken only by the low hum of the crystals and the soft crunch of our boots on the dusty stone floor. "What is this place?" Sarah whispered, her voice filled with awe and a hint of fear. "It's like something out of a dream, or a nightmare," Chris added, his eyes scanning the disturbing carvings on the walls. "This doesn't feel right." "Not at all." We approached the circular platform slowly, our curiosity warring with our growing unease. The objects on the platform were even stranger up close. The metallic devices were covered in intricate symbols that matched some of the carvings on the walls. The carved boxes were made of a dark, polished wood that seemed to absorb the light. And the skeletal remains, they were truly unsettling. The skulls were elongated and lacked any discernible eye sockets, and the limbs were far too long and slender to belong to any human. As I reached out to examine one of the metallic devices, I noticed something else on the platform, something that had been partially hidden beneath one of the carved boxes. It was a book bound in a dark, leathery material that felt strangely cold to touch. There were no markings on the cover, but as I carefully lifted it, I could see that the pages were filled with the same strange symbols that adorned the walls and the metallic devices. "Look at this," I said, showing the book to Chris and Sarah. "It's like some kind of ancient text." Chris leaned in for a closer look. "Can you read any of it?" he asked. I shook my head. "No. It's nothing like any language I've ever seen." Sarah took a picture of the book with her camera. "Maybe we can try to decipher it later," she said. "We're apparently eaten." As I flipped through the pages of the book, I noticed a series of illustrations interspersed among the text. These illustrations were even more disturbing than the carvings on the walls. They depicted grotesque creatures, bizarre rituals, and scenes of unimaginable horror. One illustration showed the elongated figures interacting with beings that seemed to be composed of pure shadow, their forms shifting and writhing in the darkness. Another depicted a massive, tentacled entity rising from a dark abyss, its many eyes filled with malevolent intelligence. A wave of nausea washed over me as I stared at the horrifying images. This was not just an ancient civilization. This felt like something else. Something alien. Something that had no place in our world. Suddenly, we heard a sound that made us all jump. It was a faint scraping noise. We're apparently eaten, coming from somewhere in the darkness beyond the platform. We all froze, our flashlights snapping towards the source of the sound. The darkness beyond the platform was deep and impenetrable, the soft glow of the crystals not reaching that far. We held our breath, listening intently. The scraping noise came again, closer this time, followed by a low, guttural growl. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through my curiosity. "We are not alone down here." "What was that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Chris replied, his hand instinctively reaching for the small knife he carried in his belt. "But I don't think we want to find out." The growling came again, louder this time, accompanied by a shuffling sound, as if something large was moving in the darkness. The air in the chamber suddenly felt heavy, charged with a palpable sense of menace. We backed away slowly from the platform, our flashlights scanning the darkness, trying to locate the source of the sounds. The shadows seemed to writhe and shift, playing tricks on our eyes, making it impossible to discern what was moving in the gloom. Then we saw it. Two glowing red eyes appeared in the darkness, followed by a low, sleek form that moved with an unnerving speed. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was vaguely reptilian, but with elongated limbs and sharp, clawed hands. Its head was small and triangular, with rows of razor-sharp teeth visible in its gaping maw. The creature lunged at us from the darkness, its red eyes burning with predatory hunger. We scrambled back, our flashlights momentarily blinding the creature. It hissed, a high-pitched, chilling sound that echoed through the chamber. "Run," I yelled, pushing Sarah behind me. We turned and fled, our flashlights bouncing wildly as we stumbled across the uneven floor of the chamber. The creature was fast, its claws clicking on the stone as it pursued us. We could hear its heavy breathing and the snapping of its jaws as it closed in. We didn't know where we were going. Our only instinct was to get away from the terrifying creature that was chasing us. We ran blindly through the darkness, the glowing crystals casting eerie shadows that danced around us like mocking spirits. We reached the base of the staircase and scrambled upwards, our legs burning with exertion. The creature was right behind us, its guttural growls echoing in the narrow stairwell. Were apparently eaten. We could feel its hot breath on our heels as it tried to snap at us. We didn't dare to look back, our focus solely on reaching the top of the stairs and the relative safety of the upper chamber. The grinding sound started again, and we looked up to see the stone door slowly rotating shut, sealing us in the darkness with the creature that was hunting us. We were trapped in the abyss with something that should not exist. The closing of the stone door above us was a death sentence. The grinding sound echoed in the narrow stairwell, each rotation of the massive stone slab severing our last hope of escape. We were trapped in the darkness with a creature that was clearly not of this world. Its guttural growls and the scraping of its claws on the stone steps behind us a constant reminder of the imminent danger. We scramble upwards with renewed desperation, our legs pumping like pistons, fueled by adrenaline and sheer terror. The spiral staircase seemed endless, each step a painful reminder of our folly. The creature was relentless, its heavy breathing growing louder as it gained on us. Suddenly, Sarah screamed. I whipped my head around, my flashlight beam catching a glimpse of the creature as it lunged. Its razor-sharp claws snagged on Sarah's backpack, ripping a large gash in the fabric. She stumbled, nearly falling down the stairs, but Chris grabbed her arm, pulling her upwards. Keep going, he yelled, his voice strained with effort and fear. Don't stop. We continued our frantic climb, the image of the creature's red eyes and snapping jaws seared into my mind. The air was thick with the creature's foul breath, and the metallic scent seemed to intensify, making me gag. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we reached the top of the staircase and burst back into the upper chamber with the glowing crystals. The ethereal light cast long, distorted shadows, making the already unsettling chamber feel even more menacing. We turned to see if the creature had followed us, but the stairwell below remained dark and silent, apparently eaten. For a moment, we dared to hope that it hadn't been able to squeeze through the opening. But then we heard a sickening scraping sound as something large and heavy began to ascend the stairs. We rushed to the stone door, desperately trying to find a way to reopen it. We pushed and pulled at the edges, trying to find the carvings we had touched before, but in our panic, we couldn't remember the correct sequence. The door remained stubbornly sealed, an impassable barrier between us and the world above. It's no use, Chris yelled, his voice filled with despair. We're trapped. The scraping sound from the stairwell was getting closer. We could hear the creature's heavy breathing just below the opening. We knew it wouldn't be long before it reached us. Panic began to set in. We were trapped in an ancient, underground chamber with a monstrous creature and no way out. The glowing crystals cast an eerie light on our faces, highlighting our fear and desperation. We have to find another way out, I shouted, my voice echoing in the chamber. There has to be something. We frantically scanned the chamber, our flashlights darting across the walls, desperately searching for another passage or any sign of an exit. The carvings on the walls seemed to mock us, their strange figures and alien symbols offering no solace. We noticed a narrow passage leading off from the main chamber, hidden behind a cluster of the glowing crystals. It was barely wide enough for us to squeeze through, but it was our only hope. This way, I yelled, pointing towards the passage. We squeezed through the narrow opening, the rough stones scraping against our skin. The passage was dark and cramped, the air thick with dust and the cloying sweet odor we had smelled in the lower chamber. We could still hear the creature behind us, its growls and the scraping of its claws echoing through the stone. The passage twisted and turned, leading us deeper into the earth. The darkness was absolute. We're apparently eaten, our flashlights the only things guiding our way. The walls were close and suffocating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were crawling into the belly of some ancient beast. After what felt like an agonizingly long time, the passage opened into another chamber, smaller than the first one. This chamber was completely bare, with no carvings on the walls and no glowing crystals to illuminate it. The only light came from our flashlights, revealing a circular hole in the floor in the center of the room. The hole looked like some kind of ancient well, its depth shrouded in darkness. The air around it was noticeably colder, and the metallic scent was almost unbearable here. "What is this place?" Sarah whispered, apparently eaten, her voice barely audible. Before either Chris or I could answer, we heard the creature behind us. It had followed us through the narrow passage and was now emerging into the chamber, its red eyes glowing menacingly in the darkness. We were cornered. The creature was blocking the passage behind us, and the only other option was the dark hole in the floor. "We have to jump," I yelled, my voice filled with desperation. Chris looked at the hole, his face pale in the beam of my flashlight. "Are you crazy? We don't know how deep that is. We don't have a choice," I replied. As the creature took a step towards us, its claws extended. Without hesitation, I jumped into the hole, plunging into the absolute darkness below. I fell for what felt like an eternity, the air rushing past me. Then, with a sickening thud, I landed on something soft and yielding. I gasped for breath, my body aching from the impact. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hand shaking uncontrollably. The beam of light revealed that I had landed in a pile of bones. Human bones. Hundreds of them, piled high in a dark, underground cavern. The sight was horrifying, a macabre testament to the fate of those who had come before us. I scrambled to my feet, my mind reeling from the gruesome discovery. Then, I heard Chris and Sarah land beside me, their faces pale and drawn in the beam of their flashlights. They had seen the bones too, and the horror of our situation was etched on their faces. But the horror wasn't over. From the darkness above, we heard the creature hiss, its red eyes glowing in the opening of the hole. It was coming down after us. We had escaped one nightmare only to fall into another. We were trapped in a cavern filled with the remains of the dead, with a monstrous creature closing in on us. Our flashlights were our only weapons, our hope dwindling with each passing moment. As the creature began its descent into the cavern, we huddled together, our fear reaching a fever pitch. We knew, with a chilling certainty, that whatever awaited us in this subterranean abyss was far beyond our comprehension, a horror that should never have been unearthed. The air grew colder, the stench of death filled our nostrils, and the darkness seemed to press in on us, promising a fate far worse than we could ever have imagined. Victims were apparently eaten. Our adventure into the forgotten corners of the world had led us to a place where nightmares were real, and where the door we had found buried deep underground had opened a gateway to something that truly shouldn't exist. And now, we were about to face the consequences, the final, terrifying consequence. My name is Ethan Carter. For the past 12 years, I've been part of the search and rescue team covering the Bitterroot National Forest and surrounding wilderness areas in Montana and Idaho. It's rugged country, beautiful, unforgiving, and vast enough to swallow people whole without a trace. Most of the time, when we get a call, it's straightforward. A hiker underestimated the weather, twisted an ankle miles from the trailhead, or got turned around chasing a photo op. We find them, patch them up, get them out. Sometimes, tragically, we're recovering remains. It's grim work, but necessary. You develop a certain professional detachment, a way of compartmentalizing the fear and the sorrow you encounter. You have to, or the job eats you alive. But nothing in my dozen years prepared me for the Daniel Miller case, and more specifically, for the tattered, water-stained journal we found clutched in what was left of his hand. The call came in late September last year. Daniel Miller, 28.
However,
From somewhere back east Chicago. I think overdue from a solo backpacking trip. He was attempting a challenging multi-day loop through one of the less trafficked sections of the Selway, Bitterroot Wilderness. Ambitious, especially for someone unfamiliar with the area, but his check-in contact said he was experienced, well equipped, and had left a detailed itinerary. He was supposed to emerge near Lake Como 3 days prior. When he didn't show and missed his check-in call, his girlfriend reported him overdue. Standard procedure kicked into gear. We established incident command, mapped out his intended route, calculated probable search areas based on terrain difficulty, potential water sources, and common navigational errors. The first few days were a frustrating mix of scouring dense forest, glassing rocky ridges with binoculars, and coordinating helicopter flyovers with thermal imaging. The weather wasn't cooperating. Early autumn storms rolled in, dumping rain and shrouding the higher elevations in fog, limiting air support and washing away potential tracks. We interviewed his girlfriend, Sarah. She painted a picture of an enthusiastic, slightly obsessive outdoorsman. Daniel had meticulously planned this trip for months. He'd bought top-of-the-line gear, studied topographical maps until he practically memorized them, and even practiced emergency preparedness drills in his local forest preserve. He wasn't reckless, she insisted, just passionate and maybe a little overconfident in his abilities when faced with true wilderness. She gave us photos, a smiling young man, lean, fit, posing with his brand new pack before leaving. Looking at that hopeful face, knowing what we know now, still sends a chill down my spine. Days turned into a week. Hope began to dwindle, as it always does. The search scaled back from active rescue to recovery. Smaller teams focused on high probability areas, creek drainages, known hazards like cliff bases or avalanche chutes. Though it was too early for significant snow accumulation and potential off shortcuts he might have attempted if lost or injured. It was my team, me, a seasoned tracker named Dave, and a rookie named Jess that found the first sign. Not Daniel, but his campsite, or what was left of it. It was located several miles off his planned route, tucked into a narrow, thickly wooded ravine that didn't appear on any standard trail map. Finding it was almost accidental. Dave spotted a short of brightly colored fabric, ripstop nylon, likely from a tent or pack cover, snagged on a thorny bush near the ravine's edge. The sight itself was deeply unsettling. His tent, a high-quality backpacking model, was shredded, not torn by wind or collapsed under rain, but ripped apart with a violence that suggested something deliberate, almost frantic. Claw marks. Maybe, but they looked odd. Too deep. Too widely spaced for a bear, not quite right for a cougar. Tent poles were snapped like twigs. His sleeping bag was half spilled out, soaked and muddy. Cooking gear was scattered. A pot here, a spork there, bent, dented. But the most disturbing thing was the lack of other signs. No blood spatters indicative of a violent animal attack. No drag marks suggesting something carried him off. His expensive backpack was leaning against a tree, seemingly untouched except for being open, its contents partially spilled. Inside, we found his emergency locator beacon, turned off. Why would an experienced hiker, lost and presumably in trouble, turn off his beacon? And then, nestled amongst a pile of damp leaves near the shredded tent, partially protected by an overhang of rock, was the journal. It was a simple moleskine type notebook, its black cover warped and stained, the pages swollen with moisture. It felt heavy, sodden. Tied around it with a piece of frayed twine was a small, smooth river stone, almost like a makeshift paperweight. Back at base camp, under the harsh glare of portable lights, we carefully dried the journal page by page, using low heat. The ink, thankfully mostly waterproof, had bled in places but remained largely legible. The handwriting started neat, confident, but deteriorated rapidly as the entries progressed, becoming a spidery, almost illegible scrawl in the final pages. Daniel Miller had documented his trip from the beginning. Reading it felt like stepping into his boots, feeling the weight of his pack, sharing his initial excitement, and things sharing his mounting terror. I've transcribed the relevant parts here. I feel like people need to know. Maybe someone else has seen something similar. Maybe I'm just trying to make sense of something that defies explanation. Whatever the reason, this story needs to be told. Journal entry day 1. The handwriting is neat, almost calligraphic. The date aligns with his departure. Bitterroot, at last. Stepped onto the trailhead exactly on she 800 hours. Air is crisp, smells like pine and damp earth. Sky is brilliant blue. Perfect hiking weather. Wood pack feels good, maybe a touch heavy, but balanced. Years of planning, months of saving, finally paying off. This is the solo trip I've always dreamed of. True wilderness. No crowds, no noise, just me and the mountain. Route plan feels solid. Aiming for Beaver Creek overlook by nightfall. Roughly 12 miles. Moderate elevation gain. Confidence is high. Let the adventure begin. There are sketches of wildflowers in the margins. Detailed notes on his pace and water consumption. Everything seems perfectly normal, exactly what you'd expect from a meticulous hiker. Journal entering. A day 2, and handwriting still neat. Date correct. Made camp last night right on schedule. Beaver Creek overlook was stunning. Watched the sunset paint the peaks orange and purple. Slept like a log, though I thought I heard something moving around outside the tent. Late at night. Probably just a deer or elk. Happens all the time. Started early today, aiming for Twin Lakes Pass. Tougher climb. The trail is definitely less maintained in this section. Lots of blowdown to navigate. Scenery remains breathtaking. Feeling strong. Filtered water at Snowslide Creek, coldest, purest water I've ever tasted. Saw some moose tracks near the marshy area below the pass. Big ones. Haven't seen another soul since yesterday morning. Exactly what I wanted. The solitude is incredible, almost deafening. It's like the whole world is holding its breath. On track for Twin Lakes by late afternoon. More sketches, notes on calorie intake, observations about geology. Still reads like a standard trip log. Journal entry day 3. The handwriting is slightly less neat here. A bit rushed. Date correct. Okay, this is strange. Reached the area where Twin Lakes should be yesterday afternoon. Except they aren't there. I mean, topography matches the map perfectly, the cirque, the surrounding ridges, the elevation. But where the lakes are marked, there's just a dry, rocky basin, filled with oddly smooth, gray stones. Not even a trickle of water. Checked the map again and again. Checked my GPS coordinates. Everything says I'm in the right place. Maybe they're seasonal. But the map shows them as permanent, sizable lakes. Significant landmarks. How could they just not be here? Camped in the basin last night. Felt incredibly exposed. And the silence, it wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt heavy, watchful. Couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. Had trouble sleeping. Kept hearing things. Not animal sounds, more like whispers, rhythmic clicking. Hard to describe. Probably just the wind funneling through the rocks. Playing tricks on my ears after 2 days alone. But it was unnerving. And the dryness, my throat feels like sandpaper, even though I've been drinking plenty. Decided to push on this morning, stick to the route. Maybe the map is outdated, or there was a geological shift. Doesn't make sense. The weirdest parting. Found small cairns, piles of stones leading away from my intended trail, towards a section of dense, old-growth forest not marked on any map. They looked deliberately placed. I ignored them obviously. Stick to the plan, but it felt odd. Like an invitation. Progress is slower today. The terrain is rougher than expected, and I feel disoriented, which is unlike me. Keep having to double-check my compass and map. Felt like I was walking in circles for an hour this morning, even though the compass bearing was steady. Shook it off. Just tired. Probably dehydrated despite my intake. Need to reach Crag Lake by tonight. Water source is critical now. The tone shift is subtle but palpable. The first real cracks appear in his confidence. The missing lakes are the first major anomaly. Journal entry 4. Handwriting noticeably messier. Some words are crossed out, smudged. Date is correct, but the time notes seem erratic. Lost. Completely, terrifyingly lost. Crag Lake isn't where it should be either. Or, I'm nowhere near where I think I am. Spent all yesterday trying to orient myself. Compass needle swings erratically near certain rock formations. GPS signal is non-existent. even on the ridges where I should have clear sky access. The map feels useless, like the landscape itself is rearranging around me. Followed a creek downstream, hoping it would lead somewhere familiar. But it just petered out into a boggy marsh that stank of decay. Doubled back. Everything looks the same. Dense trees, moss-covered rocks. Oppressive silence broken only by that damned clicking sound. It's louder now. Sometimes it sounds like it's right behind me. Sometimes far off, echoing. And the whisper's definitely not the wind. It sounds like multiple voices just on the edge of hearing, speaking in a language I don't understand. Camped last night in a small clearing. Built a large fire, more for comfort than warmth. Didn't sleep. Every shadow seemed to move. Saw shapes. Dark. Tall figures flitting between the trees at the edge of the firelight. Tried to rationalize it. Exhaustion, paranoia, tricks of the light. But it felt real. Found more cairns this morning, leading deeper into the untracked woods. They're different now. The stones are darker, almost black, and arranged in unsettling patterns. Spirals mostly. Felt a strong urge not to follow them, but also a pull. Like they were markers. And the smell. There's a weird smell in the air sometimes. Coppery, like old blood, mixed with something sickly sweet. Like overripe fruit left to rot. It comes and goes. Rationing food now. Water is a serious concern. Found a small seep yesterday, but it tasted metallic. Filtered it anyway. Need to keep moving. Try to find a recognizable landmark. But which way? Everything feels wrong. Think I saw someone. Mid-afternoon. Just a flash of movement high up on the ridge to my left. Couldn't make out details. Shouted, waved my arms. No response. They just vanished. Or maybe it was just another shadow. My mind is playing tricks on me. It has to be. Later, the clicking is closer tonight. I can hear it over the crackle of my fire. Why? It's coming from the ravine below my campsite. Reading those first few entries, even with the professional detachment I mentioned, was chilling. You could feel Daniel's logical, experienced mind struggling against something inexplicable. The missing lakes, the malfunctioning equipment, the sounds. The cairns fit painted a picture of a man not just lost physically, but losing his grip on reality in a place that seemed actively hostile and intentionally confusing. We found his remains about half a mile down, that ravine he mentioned hearing the clicking from. Not far from the shredded tent. There wasn't much left, honestly. Scavengers had been at him. But the coroner's initial report was inconclusive. No obvious signs of animal predation being the primary cause of death. Despite the scavenging, no bullet wounds, no broken bones indicative of a fall. Just Daniel Miller, or what remained, lying near the creek bed, clutching his journal. But the journal wasn't finished. There were many more pages, the entries growing darker, more frantic, more terrifying. What Daniel described happening after day 4. It's why I haven't slept properly since we found him. It's why I'm writing this now. The official report will likely say exposure, disorientation, maybe even a mental break. But that journal tells a different story. A story I'm only beginning to understand. Reading Daniel Miller's account of those first 4 days left a knot in my stomach that had nothing to do with the stale coffee at Incident Command. I've seen people get lost. I've seen panic set in. But this was different. The missing legs. The malfunctioning equipment. It wasn't just getting turned around, it felt like the wilderness itself was actively working against him, rewriting its own rules. The official preliminary report mentioned disorientation as a likely factor, leading to his eventual demise due to exposure. He soon discovered why. To say when you're sitting in a warm office, but holding that journal, feeling the damp pages. Why? Tracing the increasingly erratic handwriting, it felt like Daniel wasn't just lost in the woods. He was lost in something else. Something nested within the familiar landscape, operating under different, malevolent laws. The entries that followed only deepened that conviction. They chronicle a descent, not just into physical hardship, but into a reality fraying at the edges. Journal entry day 5. The handwriting is now cramped, shaky. Lines slant downwards. Date is smudged but looks like day 5. Can't find my way back. Tried to retrace my steps from yesterday, but the path looks different. Trees seem thicker, closer together. Landmarks I thought I recognized are gone, replaced by unfamiliar ridges and gullies. The sun is hidden by thick cloud cover. Impossible to get a bearing. Even when it peeks through, its position feels wrong. Like time isn't flowing correctly. Finished the last of my energy bars this morning. Water is dangerously low. The metallic seep I found is dry now. Everything is dry. The air itself feels desiccated. Scratching at my throat, even though the ground is damp underfoot. Paradox. The clicking never stops. It's a constant presence now. Sometimes fading to the edge of hearing, sometimes sharp and loud. Right beside me. It sounds like pebbles being clicked together, or maybe chitinous legs on rock. And the whispers, they're clearer. Still intelligible, but the intent feels clearer. Mocking, luring, hard to tell. They seem to emanate from the trees themselves, from the rocks, from the air. Found markings today, carved into the bark of ancient cedars. Not animal scratches. Geometric patterns. Sharp angles intersecting lines, vaguely resembling the spiral cards but more complex. They look fresh. The cuts are clean. Sap still oozing slightly. Who made these? Why? They weren't here yesterday, I'm sure of it. Walked this same grove trying to find that seep. Felt watched all day. Not just a general unease, but a specific feeling of eyes on my back. Spun around countless times, weaponizing my hiking poles. Shouting into the silence. Nothing. Just the dense, silent trees and the weight of the unseen. The tall figures I thought I saw by the firelight, I saw them again today. Midday. Just glimpses at the periphery of my vision. Taller than a man. Unnaturally thin, limbs too long. They melt into the shadows the moment I try to focus on them. Am I hallucinating? Lack of food, dehydration. Stress gets possible. Probable, but it feels terrifyingly real. The smell is stronger near the carvings. That cloying, rotten sweetness mixed with copper makes me gag. Forced myself to keep moving. Picked a direction, downhill, figuring it has to lead to a larger water source eventually. Found myself heading towards the ravine I camped above last night. The one the clicking came from. Felt wrong, like walking into a trap. But it was the only discernible downhill slope. The cairns are here too. More of them, leading down. Dark stones arranged in those disturbing spirals. They feel like warnings and invitations all at once. Need water. Desperately. Ethan's noting. We found carvings matching this description on several large cedar trees near the ravine where his camp was located. They weren't documented by the initial forestry survey teams years ago. Like Daniel said, they looked unsettlingly fresh. We photographed them, but analysis didn't match any known natural markings or human vandalism patterns. Journal entry day 6. Handwriting is now extremely difficult to read. Large. Looping letters interspersed with tight, cramped script. Sentences fragment. Obvious signs of dehydration and extreme stress. Water. Found water. Bottom of the ravine. Small creek, barely moving. Tastes like mud and metal, but it's wet. Drank until I felt sick. Filter is struggling. Hope it's safe. This ravine, it's different down here. Darker. Trees overhang, blocking the sky. Rocks are slick with weird, greenish moss that glows faintly in the dim light. Unnatural. Everything feels wrong. The air is heavy still. No birdsong. Even the clicking seems muffled, absorbed by the oppressive silence. Followed the creek downstream. More carvings on the rocks by the water. Same patterns. Ant bones. Small animal bones, squirrels. Birds may be arranged inside the carved symbols. Deliberately placed. Like offerings or warnings. Saw one. Not a glimpse. It was standing across the creek, partially hidden behind a thicket of alder. Tall, impossibly thin. Limbs bent at odd angles. Couldn't see a face, just a smooth. A pale oval shape where a head should be. It didn't move. Just watched me. Stood there for what felt like an hour, though the light barely changed. I was frozen. Couldn't scream, couldn't run, just stared back. Then it turned, slowly, and melted back into the trees. Not like it walked away. More like it dissolved into the shadows. Not a hallucination, too solid, too real. My heart is pounding so hard I feel sick again. What are they? Why are they here? What do they want? The whispers are constant down here, inside my head now. Sounds like names. Places. Can't make them out. Feels like pressure building behind my eyes. Keep finding the cairns. Leading deeper into the narrowest part of the ravine, where the creek seems to disappear underground. I know I shouldn't follow. Every instinct screams run, climb out of here, get back to sunlight. But I'm too weak to climb now. And the thirst already coming back. And part of me wants to know. Needs to know. What is this place? What's at the end of this path? Is this the way out? Or the way in? Feeling dizzy. Time feels slippery. Was it morning when I saw it? Or afternoon? The dim light never changes down here. Ethan's noting. The description of the ravine matches where we found Daniel. The greenish, faintly phosphorescent moss is real, our biologist. Couldn't immediately identify the species. Said it was highly unusual for this region and altitude. We also found several small animal skeletons arranged near, carved symbols on rocks along the creek bed, just as he described. It looked ritualistic. Journal entry, Day 7. The writing devolves into a near-illegible scrawl. Words crash into each other. Ink is blotted, smeared with dirt or possibly blood. There are frantic sketches in the margins, spirals, tall stick figures with elongated limbs, angular symbols. End of the path. Creek goes into cave. Mouth like screaming face. Dark stones piled around entrance. Cairns stop here. This is it. This is where they lead. Smell is overwhelming. Rotten metal. Sweet decay makes head swim. Whispers are loud now. So loud, coming from the cave. Not words I know, but I almost understand. Promise, invitation, hunger. Saw it again. Inside cave entrance, just shadow, watching. Waiting, cold. So cold here. Deeper cold than mountain air. Feels ancient. Found something. Near cave mouth. Half buried under moss. Not smooth. White. Curved. Part off skull. Too large. Shape wrong. Not animal, I know. Not human. No crude. Shaky drawing of a curved piece of bone, larger than a human femur fragment. They built this place. Or found it. Guardians. Prisoners. Drop my pack. Don't need it now. Just journal. Must write. Must document. Feel drawn. Pulled towards the dark. Part of me terrified. Part of me curious. So tired. Maybe there's rest inside. Maybe answers. Clicking coming from inside. Rhythmic. Like heartbeat. Or teeth. Sarah. Wish I could tell her. Sorry. So sorry. Light fading. Or my eyes. Hard to see page. Going in. This is the last coherent entry dated Day 7. The writing is frantic, barely legible. Journal entry. Undated fragment. Appears to be the next page. Writing is extremely erratic, possibly written in near darkness. Scrawled across the page, letters huge and distorted. Not empty. Taisuan. Tai Patiorns Re Adore. Ithugrs. Below this, a large, complex spiral symbol is drawn, taking up half the page. It seems hastily sketched, but matches the patterns Daniel described seeing carved on trees and rocks. Journal entry. Final page, just a few words, barely decipherable, smeared near the bottom corner. The ink is thin, watery. Possibly diluted by rain or something else. It knows my name. E. That's where the writing ends. The remaining pages are blank, warped, stained with mud and mildew, and things I try not to think too hard about. Reading that final sequence, imagining Daniel Miller, weakened and terrified, standing before that cave entrance, pulled between primal fear and some desperate, inexplicable curiosity. It's haunting. The cave exists. We found it exactly where Daniel's journal indicated, deep in that unnatural ravine. The entrance does look unnervingly like a gaping mouth, framed by dark, moss-covered rocks. The creek flows into it, vanishing into absolute darkness. We documented the entrance, the strange carvings around it, the disturbing bone fragment Daniel drew, which forensics later confirmed was unidentifiable, belonging to known North American species. Standard procedure would be to explore the cave system as part of the recovery effort, searching for Daniel's remains. But something stopped us. Standing there, feeling the palpable cold radiating from the entrance, hearing the echo, dripping water that sounded disturbingly like that clicking Daniel described, seeing the sheer wrongness of the place. Even Dave, the most stoic tracker I know, looked spooked. We flagged the entrance, took extensive photos, GPS coordinates, samples of the moss, and the bone fragment. But we didn't go in. Officially. It was deemed too hazardous without specialized caving equipment and geological assessment due to potential instability and unknown depths. Unofficially. None of us wanted to cross that threshold. It felt like a violation, like stepping into a place humans weren't meant to be. It felt like tempting whatever Daniel had encountered. The bone fragment, the carvings, the moss, they were logged as anomalous findings, filed away in evidence lockers. Daniel Miller's death was officially attributed to exposure and dehydration, likely exacerbated by disorientation. The shredded tent and scattered campsite were explained away as possible bear activity post-mortem, even though it didn't quite fit. The journal was considered the unfortunate record of a man losing his mind under duress. But I know what I read. I know what we saw. Daniel Miller didn't just get lost. He found something. Or maybe it found him. And the most terrifying part, I don't think it's contained to that ravine. Discovered why. Those patterns he saw, the ones he called a door, I think I've seen them somewhere else since then.
Kasi ma'am,
The Daniel Miller recovery operation officially closed a week after we brought him. What was left of him out of that ravine? Reports were filed. Gear was cleaned and stowed, and the team debriefing focused clinically on procedural effectiveness and logistical challenges. The strange carvings, the glowing moss, the unidentified bone fragment, they were documented, tagged, and filed away as anomalous findings, requiring further specialist analysis that, realistically, might never happen to budget constraints and caseload priorities. The cave was noted as a geological hazard. Daniel's journal was sealed as personal effects, eventually returned to his grieving girlfriend, Sarah. Though I made sure to keep my transcribed copy and the photos I'd taken of every page. Case closed. That's what the paperwork said. But for me, and I suspect for Dave and Jess too, though we didn't talk about it much, it wasn't closed at all. There was a palpable sense of disquiet that lingered long after the official case files were shut. We'd all seen things in the wilderness, faced dangers, recovered victims of accidents and animal attack. But the Miller site felt fundamentally different. It wasn't just a place where someone died. It felt like a place wrongfully occupied, like we had stumbled onto the edge of territory belonging to something ancient and inimical to human life. The silence of that ravine, the unnatural cold near the cave mouth, we soon discovered why. The sheer malevolence suggested by the shredded tent and the carefully arranged bones, it settled deep in my bones. A chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Sleep offered little respite. For weeks my dreams were haunted by images from the journal. Why? By the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes among the trees. By the imagined sound of that incessant clicking echoing in the dark. I'd wake up in a cold sweat. The final words, "It knows my name," echoing in my mind. I found myself compulsively checking the locks on my doors and windows. something I hadn't done since I first moved out here. The comfortable solitude of my own cabin, nestled in the woods miles from town, suddenly felt less secure, more isolating. I tried to dismiss it as a stress reaction, PTSD from a particularly disturbing recovery. But the feeling persisted. We soon discovered why. Fueled by the memory of Daniel's words and the physical evidence we'd encountered, I kept looking at the photos of the carvings, those complex spirals and angular patterns. They felt significant, purposeful, like more than just random scratchings. Like Daniel wrote, they felt like a door or maybe a keyhole. Then, about 2 months after the Miller case closed, I saw it. The pattern. Not on a tree or a rock, but spray painted crudely on the wall of a derelict gas station on the outskirts of Missoula. It wasn't identical to the carvings in the ravine, but the core elements, the intersecting lines, the sharp angles, the disturbing spiral motif, were unmistakably the same. My blood ran cold. Seeing it there, scrawled in ugly orange paint amidst mundane graffiti tags, felt like a violation, a leakage. Like finding a rare, venomous snake slithering across your kitchen floor. Who would paint that? And why there? Was it just a coincidence? Some local kid copying something they'd seen somewhere without understanding it? Or was it a sign? A marker, like the cairns Daniel followed? I took photos, asked around discreetly, but nobody knew anything about it. Just another piece of random vandalism as far as anyone was concerned. But for me, it was the catalyst. It shattered the fragile compartmentalization I'd tried to build. The patterns weren't confined to that cursed ravine in the Bitterroot. They were out here, which meant it might be out here too. I started digging. Quietly, in my off hours, using my own computer, not the SAR network resources. I told myself I was just trying to understand what happened to Daniel, to give his death some context beyond exposure. But I knew it was more than that. I felt compelled, almost obsessed, like Daniel himself, following the cairns. I started with local history and folklore. Montana and Idaho have their share of strange tales, phantom lights, elusive cryptids like Bigfoot, areas known for disappearances. I cross-referenced old newspaper archives, police cold case files, focusing on missing person reports, specifically within or near the Bitterroot and Selway wilderness areas over the past century. The sheer number of people who have vanished without a trace in these mountains is staggering. 100. Often officially attributed to getting lost, accidents, animal attacks, or foul play, but many cases had lingering question marks. Experienced individuals vanishing from well-marked trails. Searches finding no tracks. Belongings discovered miles off any logical route. Sometimes with unsettling details, noted but dismissed in final reports. I searched online forums dedicated to hiking mysteries, unexplained disappearances, and high strangeness. Threads discussing people feeling watched, experiencing inexplicable disorientation or time distortion, hearing strange noises, clicking, whispering, humming sounds were surprisingly common motifs. Most were anecdotal, easily dismissed as imagination or misinterpretation. But the consistency across different accounts, separated by years and miles, began to feel significant. Then I started searching specifically for the patterns. Using image recognition tools on the photos, I took the carvings and the graffiti, cross, referencing with databases of symbols, archaeological markings, even occult sigils, mostly dead ends. But then, deep within a digitized university archive of anthropological field notes from the 1930s, I found a reference. An anthropologist studying Salish Kuatnai. Oral traditions had recorded a story, dismissed by him as a fragmentary superstition, about certain wrong places deep in the mountains, places where the veil between worlds was thin. The notes mentioned elders warning against following strange stone markers or entering caves from which cold air flowed. Most chillingly, the anthropologist had sketched a symbol described in these warnings, a protective ward, supposedly. It wasn't identical to Daniel's patterns, but it shared that same angular, unsettling geometry. The notes mentioned it was associated with the ones who walk between the trees, or the silent watchers, described vaguely as tall, thin figures rarely seen directly. The file ended abruptly, the anthropologist having apparently abandoned that line of inquiry. It felt like finding a puzzle piece, albeit one from a completely different puzzle box. Was Daniel's experience tied to these older legends? Were the patterns he saw not a door, but a warning sign he failed to heed? Or maybe both. My search became more targeted. I looked for disappearances or strange events specifically linked to caves or unusual geological formations in remote areas, not just locally but globally. The internet is a vast, dark forest of information and misinformation, but patterns emerge if you look long enough. Stories from the Appalachians, the Urals, the Andes hikers vanishing, cavers experiencing impossible phenomena, accounts of non-human entities seen near cave entrances. And sometimes, tantalizingly, mentions of strange symbols or feelings of being watched. I found a blog post, obscure and poorly written, by someone claiming to be part of a small, informal group investigating what they called liminal geography, places where reality felt thin or overlapped with something else. They referenced several cases, including a notorious string of hiker disappearances in a national park in Germany, and mentioned encountering similar geometric symbols carved into rocks near a cave system there. The post was years old, the blog inactive, contact links dead. Another dead end, but it reinforced the idea that this wasn't isolated. Then came the connection that truly solidified my obsession. I was rereading my transcription of Daniel's journal, focusing on the last fragmented entries. The Pactoren's area door. What did he mean? A metaphorical door? A psychological one? Or something literal? On a hunch, I searched for news reports related to Daniel Miller before he went missing. Standard stuff, mostly local Chicago articles about his upcoming dream hike. But buried in the comments section of one article, posted anonymously, about a month after Daniel disappeared, but before we found his body or the journal, was a single, cryptic sentence. He shouldn't have looked for the Selway spiral. Some doors don't open from this side. The Selway spiral. I'd never heard that term. It wasn't in any official park literature, maps, or historical records I'd accessed. I searched the phrase. Almost nothing. A few hits on deep web forums discussing esoteric landmarks, full of conspiracy theories and vague claims. But one hit stood out, a link to a scanned page from a privately published, out-of-print book from the 1970s titled Forgotten Pathways, A Wanderer's Guide to Montana's Hidden Places. Finding a copy took weeks of trawling online used booksellers. When it finally arrived, a slim, unassuming paperback with a faded cover, I felt a tremor of anticipation. The book was a bizarre mix of genuine backcountry route descriptions, local legends, and highly speculative ramblings about ley lines and hidden history. And there it was, a short chapter titled The Whispering Ravine and the Selway Spiral. It described a legend, sourced from Old Trapper Tales, of a hidden ravine somewhere deep in the Selway, Bitterroot Wilderness. A place avoided by natives and early settlers, rumored to be a nexus point, guarded by silent watchers. The legend claimed that within this ravine, there was a cave, and near its entrance, a unique geological formation, or perhaps an ancient carving, the Selway Spiral. The book warned that gazing upon the spiral could induce disorientation, visions, and draw the attention of the ravine's guardians. It spoke of people who sought it out and were never seen again or returned changed. Wrong. The description of the ravine, the cave, the feeling of the place, it was eerily similar to Daniel's journal and our own observations. But there was no map, no precise location given, just vague directions and warnings. Did Daniel know about this legend? Did he deliberately seek out the Selway Spiral? His meticulous planning, his desire for true wilderness. Maybe he wasn't just looking for solitude. Maybe he was looking for something more. And the anonymous comment on that news article who posted it. Someone who knew Daniel. Someone who knew about the spiral. The book didn't describe the spiral itself in detail, frustratingly. But it ended the chapter with a chilling sentence. They say the spiral is not just a carving, but a map, not of the land around you, but of the paths between. Paths between what? Worlds? Realities. The official narrative said, Daniel Miller died of exposure after getting lost. But the journal, the carvings, the cave, the legends, the anonymous comment. Obscure. This obscure book, they all pointed towards something else. Daniel didn't just stumble into the wrong place. He might have been looking for it. Soon discovered why. And whatever he found in that cave, whatever looked back, whatever knew his name, it was connected to something far bigger and far older than a single patch of wilderness in Montana. And the patterns, the spiral, they were the key. The faded paperback of Forgotten Pathways felt heavy in my hands, heavier than its slim weight suggested. The legend of the Whispering Ravine, the Selway Spiral, the Silent Watchers, it resonated too closely with Daniel Miller's final, terrified entries. Coupled with the graffiti I'd seen, the implication was chilling. Whatever Daniel had encountered wasn't just a localized anomaly contained within that lost corner of the Bitterroot. It was part of something larger. Something with patterns that could manifest even here in the mundane world. The thought that those symbols, That door, as Daniel called it, could appear spray painted on a gas station wall, felt profoundly wrong. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The official report felt like a lie, a deliberate sanding down of rough, terrifying edges to fit a comfortable narrative. Daniel hadn't just died. He'd been consumed by something we refused to acknowledge. And if that something could reach beyond the wilderness, wasn't there a responsibility to understand it? To know what we were actually dealing with? The questions gnawed at Meg. What was the Selway spiral? What was inside that cave? What really happened to Daniel Miller after he wrote those final words? There was only one way to find out. I had to go back. Not as part of an official SAR team this time, constrained by procedure and plausible deniability, but alone. My preparation was different from any SAR mission I'd undertaken. Standard survival gear, yes, pack, shelter, food, water filter, first aid, but also things specific to Daniel's account and the legends. I packed multiple light sources, high-powered LED headlamps, backup flashlights, even chemical glow sticks. 2 compasses, checked and double-checked away from any potential magnetic interference. A satellite messenger, fully charged, with check-in protocols arranged with a trusted friend who thought I was just doing some solo backcountry mapping. Audio recording devices, a digital voice recorder, and my phone, set to record ambient sound. And tucked into my chest pocket, a laminated printout of the protective symbol, sketched in that, anthropologist's notes from the 1930s. Maybe it was superstition, but after everything I'd read, I wasn't taking chances. I timed my trip for a window of clear weather, hoping to avoid the fog and rain that hampered the initial search. Hiking back into that section of the Selway, Bitterroot felt different this time. The beauty of the landscape seemed muted, overlaid with a subtle filter of dread. Or maybe it was just my own perception, colored by the knowledge I now carried. The initial miles followed marked trails, but eventually, I had to navigate towards the coordinates we'd logged for the ravine. As I drew closer, the atmosphere shifted perceptibly. The air grew stiller. The ambient sounds of the forest, birds, insects, the rustle of wind faded into an oppressive silence. It was the same heavy, watchful quiet Daniel had described. The trees seemed darker, their branches more tangled, blocking out the sunlight even at midday. I found myself checking my compasses frequently. They remained steady, but the landscape felt misleading, urging me towards paths that seemed slightly off from my memory and the GPS track log from the recovery. Then, the smell hit me, faint at first, then stronger as I descended into the ravine itself. That sickly sweet scent of decay, mixed with the sharp tang of old blood or copper. It clung to the back of my throat, making my stomach churn. And beneath it, the faintest hint of ozone, like the air before a lightning strike. The ravine was just as I remembered, perhaps even more unsettling in its familiarity. The dark, slick rocks, the eerie, faintly glowing green most clinging to surfaces where sunlight rarely touched, the sluggish, metallic-tasting creek. Why? I found the small animal bones arranged near carved symbols along the creek bed. untouched since we documented them months ago. No scavenger had disturbed these morbid tablias. My heart pounded as I approached the coordinates for the cave entrance. It gaped from the ravine wall, a ragged maw of darkness framed by jagged rocks. The unnatural cold intensified, radiating outwards. Why? Raising goosebumps on my arms despite the physical exertion of the hike. The sound, or lack thereof, was profound. Even the trickle of the creek seemed to be swallowed by the void. But listening intently, straining my ears, I could just make out the faintest, rhythmic click, like Daniel's journal described. Click, click, was it dripping water deep inside, echoing strangely? Or something else? And there, etched into a large, flat rock face just to the left of the cave entrance, almost hidden by the glowing moss, until you were right upon it, was the spiral. It wasn't just a simple spiral. It was complex, intricate, a dizzying labyrinth of sharp angles, nested spirals, and lines that seemed to intersect at impossible geometries. It pulsed with a disturbing energy, drawing the eye inward. Staring at it, I felt a wave of vertigo wash over me, the same disorientation Daniel described. The edges of my vision seemed to fuzz slightly, and the clicking sound grew momentarily louder, sharper, seeming to emanate from the carving itself. The air shimmered faintly above the rock. This was it, the Selway spiral. Not just a carving, the book had said, but a map. A door. I activated my audio recorder, holding it up. Ethan Carter. Recording at the entrance to the cave in ravine designation SR3B. I stated, my voice sounding thin in the heavy silence. Confirming visual identification of the Selway spiral carving, matching descriptions. I reached out, instinctively, to touch the carving, then pulled my hand back sharply. An intense feeling of wrongness radiated from the stone, a static charge that prickled my skin. Looking closer, I saw that the lines of the carving weren't uniform. Some seemed ancient, worn smooth by time and weather. Others looked fresher, sharper, almost identical to the carvings on the trees nearby, and disturbingly similar to the graffiti I'd seen back in Missoula. As if the spiral wasn't static, but something that was periodically updated or reinforced. The whispers started then. Faint, insidious, just at the edge of my hearing, like strands of smoke curling around my thoughts. Not words, not yet, but sibilant sounds that seemed to promise what? Knowledge, escape, power. They resonated with a primal part of the brain, bypassing logic and targeting raw desire and fear. I took a deep breath, gripping the laminated protective symbol in my pocket like a talisman. Daniel's last coherent word was, going in. Did I have the nerve? Could I step across that threshold into the absolute darkness, into the source of the clicking, the whispers, the cold? As I hesitated, peering into the impenetrable blackness of the cave mouth, my headlamp beam catching only dancing dust motes, something shifted within the darkness. A flicker of movement, deeper inside than my light could reach. My blood turned to ice. Was it one of them, the tall, thin figures Daniel saw? I held my breath, straining to see. Another flicker, and then a sound. Not the clicking, not the whispers, but a low, guttural scraping noise, like stone dragging on stone. echoing from deep within the cave. It was answered by a series of sharp, rapid clicks from another direction inside. Communication. Terror warred with the burning need to know. I took one step towards the entrance, then another. The cold intensified dramatically. Biting through my layers of clothing, the smell grew overpowering. The whispers swirled, coalescing, almost forming words I couldn't or didn't want to understand. Suddenly, my satellite messenger, clipped to my pack strap, beeped loudly, the preset alarm for my check-in time. The sudden, mundane sound shattered the oppressive tension. In that instant of broken concentration, I saw it. Not a tall figure. Not this time. Just inside the cave mouth, where the darkness was absolute, 2 points of faint, pale light flickered into existence. Eyes. No, not eyes. They were too low to the ground, too widely spaced. They glowed with a dead, phosphorescent light, like the moss on the rocks, but brighter. And they were looking at me. The scraping sound came again, closer this time. And the clicking intensified, becoming a deafening, chattering roar that filled my ears. The whispers resolved into a single, piercing mental command: GTOT. It wasn't a suggestion. It was raw. Primal terror injected directly into my nervous system. Every instinct screamed danger, violation, imminent destruction. I didn't think, I reacted. I stumbled backwards, tripping over a loose rock, scrambling away from the cave mouth. Away from those pale, dead lights and the overwhelming psychic pressure. I didn't stop running until I was halfway up the side of the ravine, gasping for breath, heart hammering against my ribs. I looked back down. The cave entrance was just a dark slash in the distance. The lights were gone. The sounds had faded back to the oppressive silence, broken only by own ragged breathing. I didn't go back down. I climbed out of the ravine, forcing my way through the undergrowth, not stopping until I reached the more familiar, sun-dappled forest miles away, where the birds sang and the air smelled only of pine and earth. I made it back. I have the audio recording, though listening back is disturbing. You can hear the clicking, the whispers, faintly, like static, the scraping sound, and my own terrified breathing. You can hear the satellite messenger beep and think nothing coherent. Just the sounds of my panicked retreat. The protective symbol. It feels warm, strangely, even now. Maybe it helped. Maybe I was just lucky. I don't know what's in that cave. I don't know what the Selway spiral truly unlocks or maps. I don't know what the pale lights were, or what the clicking and scraping sounds meant. But I know it's real. Daniel Miller didn't imagine it. He walked through a door he shouldn't have, into a place not meant for humans. Guarded by entities that hunger or protect or simply are, in a way we can't comprehend. The official story remains unchanged. My personal logs from this unauthorized trip remain private. Who would believe them? Sharing the audio, the story, might just paint me as unstable, like they assumed Daniel was. Worse, it might draw attention, the wrong kind of attention, to that place. Some doors are best left unopened. But I'm writing this now, putting it out there anonymously, like that comment on the news article, because the patterns are spreading. Last week, I saw it again. Not graffiti this time. Etched faintly, almost invisibly, into the dusty window of a coffee shop downtown. The Selway spiral. It wasn't there the day before. They say the spiral is a map of the paths between. Maybe those paths don't just lead out from places like the Whispering Ravine. Maybe they also lead in. And maybe something, alerted by Daniel, or by me, is looking for new doorways. Be careful where you hike. Be careful what patterns you notice in the periphery. Be careful what doors you test. Some things, once seen, see you back. And they know your name.